Well, we take a look now at our small cap space. We are joined by Vanessa van Vuuren, who's the portfolio manager at Sanlam Investment Management, a small cap fund. Vanessa, thank you so much for making the time to join us today. Let's kick off with a look at Zeda. They came out with their interim results. They were, however, at the high end of what a lot of the analysts were looking at. But in terms of their market performance on that day, the share price didn't do much. We get the sense that investors were hoping that this company would be doing a lot more.
Good afternoon. Yeah, for sure. I think the thing about Zeda is it's definitely a long-term story, and if you looked at just the core headline earnings growth, it didn't look great, but what you should be looking at is the net asset value growth, which was material and was strong. It's definitely an asset where investors need to be very patient because they're growing long-term strategies there. So besides, if you look at the agricultural strategy, buying Chaitan assets in Zambia, which are farming assets, doing double cropping in soya and wheat. That's just starting. It's in the early phases now. That's a 7 to 10 year story. So certainly there's a lot of value sitting in the share, but investors need to have a longer term view. But generally some of the bigger assets in the portfolio, if you just look at their stake in Pioneer, it's done extremely well. And then some of the other assets like Capefin, Capespan, all doing extremely well at this point in the cycle.
Yeah. So if you're looking at the specific stock, this would be something that you would be buying long term, or would this be something that would be of interest to you?
It's definitely of interest to us, and I think, as I said earlier, it's definitely from a longer-term investor perspective. I wouldn't be encouraging people who have a short-term investment horizon to be buying it. I certainly think that if you've got a longer-term horizon and you can be patient, it's an ideal stock from that perspective.
Let's talk about AstraPac. I think when I was speaking to you earlier, what was of interest to me with regards to that is that if you looked at Mondi, although they are playing in different spheres, Mondi by Merrill Lynch has been put as one of those stocks in terms of being one of their boom stocks when they look at what they've been doing. So Mondi's looking at playing into the green space with recycling and so forth. Is this something that AstraPac could possibly be using in terms of their long-term strategy to boost their performance?
I think, AstraPac's results came out last week and it didn't look too great in the short term. The business is going through a very big restructuring. And to your point about the long-term issues around recycling, it is definitely part of their strategy. And I think if you look across, it's a plastics packaging purely. So there the focus is on plastics recycling and accumulating assets on that side, and to make sure that that process is in place, because it's still very much in its infancy in South Africa where people are recycling plastic properly. So it's part of their strategy longer term to bring down costs from the raw material perspective. But certainly it's not happening in the short term. I think Mondi and those guys are probably a little bit more advanced in their own process.
But Vanessa, the packaging industry seems to be under pressure in general. What are some of the pressures in that sector that you're seeing?
I think it's just the general economic environment is tough. So consumer demand is a little less transparent at this point in time. So they are largely exposed to consumer demand. And so your big FMCG players, your Unilevers, Tiger Brands, those guys have been cutting down some of their runs, which is obviously affecting the plastics demand, and we're seeing that under pressure in the short term. So definitely you need a better economic environment just to see that improving in the short to medium term.
I'm going to shift gears again and talk about Sovereign. Now, I think in light of the tariff situation that we've had, saying now that we are looking at higher tariffs, Sovereign, in the long term, do you think this will reap much benefits? Because in the short term, one would say yes, long term, not so much. What's your view?
I think the poultry tariffs were a bit of a mixed bag. So obviously it was a little more muted than I think what the industry was hoping for on the production side. The importers were probably a little more happier that there was a pragmatic meeting of minds. I think it's not going to have a major impact in the short term, because it's basically just putting in an import tariff on what comes from South America, which makes up around 25% of imports on poultry. And from a Sovereign perspective, there isn't a major impact for them. There is a little bit of an opportunity where they can produce fillets, which has a higher import duty that's been applied to it. So there is a little bit of opportunity from that perspective. But I think the big issue is that European imports have not been dealt with, and that still makes up also around 25% of imports. And so there is a risk that more importation comes through on the poultry side from Europe as opposed to from South America.